Right now, you decided to keep reading this sentence. You feel certain of that? You chose it. But the real answer is far stranger. In a lab in the early 1980s, a scientist wired people's brains to a machine, asked them to move a finger whenever they felt like it, and then watched something that shouldn't have been possible. Their brains had already started the movement before the people knew they'd decided to move at all. Your brain, it turns out, might be making decisions before you, not after. Before. Let that sit for a second. The scientist was named Benjamin Libet. He wanted to answer one of the oldest questions in human history. Do you control your actions, or do you just watch them happen and take credit afterward? So he built a strange little setup. Volunteers sat in front of a clock with a fast-moving dot circling its face. Their job was simple. Flick their wrist whenever they felt the urge and note exactly where the dot was on the clock the moment they became aware of that urge. Meanwhile, electrodes on their scalp were recording something called the readiness potential. This is a slow build of electrical activity in the brain that happens right before a voluntary movement. Think of it as your brain quietly loading the action before you pull the trigger. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The readiness potential appeared, on average, a few hundred milliseconds before the person reported feeling the conscious urge to move. Their brain was already committing to the motion, and only after that commitment had begun did their mind produce the feeling of choosing it. You didn't decide, then act. Your brain acted, then told you that you decided. Why would evolution build a mind that lies to itself like that? Why hand you the illusion of authorship over something you never actually authored? To understand that, you have to go back further than any laboratory. Long before clocks and electrodes, your ancestors were animals moving through a dangerous world, and their brains were built for one job above all others. Not truth, survival. A brain that reacts to a rustling bush before it consciously reasons through the danger lives longer than a brain that waits for permission from awareness. Speed mattered more than accuracy. Reflex mattered more than reflection. Somewhere in that ancient pressure, a strange trade-off got baked into your skull. Your body got very good at acting first. Your conscious mind got very good at explaining, after the fact, why it acted. That explaining voice in your head, the one that feels like the driver, might actually be more like a passenger. A passenger who insists, every single time, that it was the one steering. Decades after Libet's experiment, technology caught up and made the picture even stranger. A neuroscientist named John Dylan Haynes ran people through brain scanners and had them press one of two buttons whenever they wanted, left or right, no rules attached. Using pattern recognition on their brain activity, his team could predict which button a person would press up to 10 seconds before that person felt they had decided. 10 seconds. In a decision that felt completely spontaneous, completely free, completely theirs. 10 seconds is an eternity in the mind's timeline. That's not a subconscious nudge arriving a heartbeat early. That's a decision quietly forming while your conscious self is still catching up, still under the impression that nothing has happened yet. So what is that feeling of choosing, if not the moment of choice itself? A psychologist named Daniel Wegner spent years studying exactly that question, and he landed on something almost unsettling in its simplicity. He argued that the feeling of willing an action is not a direct readout of causing that action. It's a separate mental event generated by the brain that usually just happens to line up with what your body is already doing. Usually. Wegner ran an experiment where two people, a participant and a hidden partner, both had their hands resting on a device controlling a small toy figure on a board. The partner secretly controlled where the figure moved. But when researchers played certain words into the participant's headphones just before a movement, timed to plant a suggestion, the participant reported feeling like they had caused that movement themselves. They hadn't. Their hands never actually touched the controls that mattered. The feeling of authorship, in other words, can be manufactured. It can be attached to actions you didn't cause and detached from actions you did. It's not a window into the machinery. It's a story your brain tells about the machinery, and like most stories, it can be edited. Does this mean free will is dead? Scientists still argue fiercely about that, and the honest answer is nobody fully knows. Some researchers point out that Libet's window was only a few hundred milliseconds, barely enough time to matter for anything except the smallest muscle twitches. Others argue that even if the urge to act starts unconsciously, you still retain a kind of veto power, a last-second ability to stop yourself, and that veto might be where real freedom lives. But something more useful than the free will debate falls out of all this. Something you can actually use today. Think about the last time you snapped at someone you love over something small. In the moment, it felt like a choice, a clean, deliberate decision to raise your voice. But underneath that feeling was a brain that had already started reacting, shaped by a bad night's sleep, a stressful email, 100 tiny pressures stacking up outside your awareness, and your conscious mind simply arrived afterward to narrate it as a decision you made on purpose. That doesn't mean you're off the hook. It means the story you tell about your own behavior deserves a little more suspicion than you usually give it. Every time you're certain you know exactly why you did something, you're building a narrative on top of processes you can't actually see. The reasons you give yourself for scrolling your phone, for eating the second slice, for staying quiet when you should have spoken up, those reasons often arrive after the behavior has already begun, dressed up as the cause. Which means real change might not start with willpower at all. It might start earlier, in the conditions that shape the readiness potential before it ever reaches your awareness. Sleep. Environment? What you put in front of yourself. Who you spend your time around. Change those, and you're not fighting your decisions after they've already formed. You're reaching further back, into the machinery, before the story even gets written. There's something oddly freeing in that. If you're not a flawless commander issuing perfect orders to your body, you don't have to feel like a failure every time your willpower runs out. You're not broken. You're a brain-running ancient, fast reflexive circuitry, wrapped in a narrator that shows up a beat late and takes the credit. So the next time you feel completely certain about why you just did something, pause. Ask what happened in the seconds, or the hours, or the years before that feeling arrived. The answer is usually less about a single conscious choice and more about a long chain of quiet, unseen momentum finally reaching the surface. You didn't decide to keep reading this sentence. Something in you had already started, long before you noticed, and your mind simply arrived right on cue to tell you it was your idea all along.